Welcome everybody. This is the Q2 webinar hosted by Inovateus Solar and Galway Sustainable Capital today. The topic is the interconnection between future-focused investing, solar energy, and a transition to a sustainable economy. My name is Tyler Kanczuzewski. I'm the VP of Sustainability here at Inovateus, and we have Sarene Marshall with us today of Galway. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer. Thanks, Sarene, for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
It's going to be an exciting discussion. Here's a look at what we're going to be talking about, a little bit about sustainable investments and some of the negative implications. Dig into ecosystems thinking around Galway, and then we'll talk about Inovateus Solar's best practices for sustainable solar development and some of our benchmark and metrics. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Sarene. She'll talk to you about Galway.
Thanks so much, Tyler. And for those of you that don't know, Galway is a specialty finance company, and we have invested in Inovateus as one of our portfolio businesses. So there's a lot of synergy in terms of what you'll hear me and Tyler talk about. I'd like to take a minute and just explain some background on who Galway is as an investor and how we come to this issue. So that's fine. Next slide. Thank you. Our mission in the founding of Galway was to accelerate the transition to a sustainable economy for all. By all, we mean for people, and we mean for the planet and all the life that's on it. We have gone a step further than that mission in articulating 6 specific areas in which we seek to have positive impact on people and the planet. We have 3 environmental areas: climate risk reduction, healthy lands and waters, and waste reduction, and 3 social areas: diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically of underrepresented groups, so that, women, people of color, the financially underprivileged, health and wellness, and economic opportunity and financial security. And under that, we put a lot of the building blocks that create economic opportunity and security, including jobs and education, but also important supportive services like housing and childcare that one needs in order to advance professionally and economically in many cases. I'd like to just say also on climate risk reduction that this includes the mitigation of greenhouse gases that cause climate change, carbon dioxide and other gases. It also includes improving resilience of people and natural systems to be able to withstand, absorb, and recover from shocks, especially those that will come increasingly so with climate change, like extreme weather. So these are the impacts we'd like to have on the planet. In order to do that, we've identified 6 particular investment sectors. So next, Tyler. Next. Yeah. The 6 sectors are food, land, and water, green, efficient, and healthy buildings, renewable and distributed energy, transportation and mobility services, a broad category called goods and services, which includes industrial processes, manufacturing, as well as a host of financial services and social services. And then carbon as a specific product category, but also as a specific marketplace for carbon offsets and credits and other types of credits that may derive from that. So this is our general philosophy. Next. In the context of the investment world, it's important to kind of understand where Galway sits, and often this is a source of some confusion. But we live at a very, very interesting and exciting intersection that is somewhat unique in the investment space. There has been a lot of buzz and a whole lot of growth in what is called ESG investing. Galway certainly is connected to that world and fits in that space in some regard, but we go beyond that philosophy by seeking a really holistic approach to how we want to do good in the world while also seeking healthy financial returns. And so we don't just seek to minimize risks or to avoid damaging industries, but we also seek to do good for people, for planet, and for profits as well. Next. As evidence of some of the ways in which ESG issues are completely central to Galway's culture and business, we have created a number of tools and processes and strategies and steps that screen and evaluate and interact with all of the ESG issues in all of our portfolio companies from start to finish in our deal process. So from the moment we entertain a deal all the way through to when we are managing that business, owning that asset, or managing our interactions with the business, ESG is something that is involved from start to finish. We don't come in after the investment's made and look at the ESG issues. We don't seek to sort of make certain investments sound better by focusing on some of the good things, but this is really core to who we are. Next. And the impacts we are able to articulate across our portfolio demonstrate the comprehensive nature of our thinking and the way in which we approach sustainability. A lot of ESG investors or other sustainability investors might invest in only a single sector or only a single type of impact. You might see a gender fund, or you might see a renewable energy fund or firm or something, or climate tech investors, that sort of thing. We look broadly at the set of issues, impacts, and sectors that we think are critical. And in that regard, this is just an illustration. This is not a holistic and complete catalog of all of our impacts, but you can see how a given investment actually may hit multiple benefit areas, and how overall our portfolio of investments are hitting all 6 of our impact areas that we have articulated for ourselves. Next. A lot of people refer to the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, as kind of the best framework the world has for what needs to be done to achieve truly sustainable development for people and the planet. This set of goals was written by sort of all the governments in the world and a lot of advocates on different issues, very comprehensive and detailed. And we at Galway have taken pains to actually make sure we are mapping our philosophy and our impacts to the Sustainable Development Goals, and not just at the level of the pretty little icons and their 3-word labels, but actually at a more detailed level of the text that goes behind them, and that's what those numbers indicate. So again, you can see we have a very kind of diversified portfolio in terms of impacts when it comes to sustainable development. Next. So all that's great, but I wanted to say we are not naive. We are very realistic about the world and how it operates. And if any of you have ever played the game Whack-A-Mole, or if you've ever tried to squeeze a balloon, you know that sometimes in your efforts to deal with one problem or eliminate something, frustratingly, it may pop out somewhere else, or something else might pop out that you didn't anticipate. And so we think about, again, the ecosystem of investments that we're making and ensuring, or trying to ensure, there are not negative consequences from investments we might make. Next. Unfortunately, the world has a long list of examples in which humankind tried to solve one problem and created another in the process. The solution may not have been entirely well thought through. And this has happened on the environmental front as well. Next. One of the most well-known, greatest examples, if any of you happen to live in the South, although with climate change, kudzu is no longer in the South, no longer just in the South, is this lovely vine called kudzu, which might be surprising to some, that the Army Corps of Engineers actually purposefully introduced to work to solve an erosion problem. They said this magical vine will cover hillsides and keep the soil stable, and we will not have mudslides, and we will be able to solve erosion problems. Unfortunately, we see the rest of the story. Kudzu takes over, it kills lots of plants and other things. And it's not just limited to plants that we've had invasive species. Oops. This is a picture of Asian carp in the Mississippi. They're famous for jumping and causing lots of damage to boats and to swimmers, and therefore costing the recreational industry a fair amount of money. And Asian carp were brought into the US on purpose to help clean up fish farms, catfish farms in particular. But then they escaped the farms and now they're in the waterways doing all kinds of other damage. And one of perhaps the most troubling examples of the trying to do good and causing lots of other problems in the process, and I don't mean this to say that the Green Revolution was all bad, is that the Green Revolution, spearheaded by Norman Borlaug, was intended to solve really, really difficult social problems around hunger and poverty, and particularly in rural places like in India, where yields were very low and wheat was falling over because it was very heavy up top, and it was very difficult to farm and create wealth and nutrition from these kinds of farms. Unfortunately, the solutions to that problem in the Green Revolution were pesticides, fertilizers. Oh, can you go back? Pesticides, fertilizers, hybrid crops that are very sensitive to invasion, and machinery. Now, the good news is we've been able to feed a whole bunch more people on the planet, and a lot of people have risen out of poverty as a result, and people are better fed. So that's great. The bad news is our farming today is very unsustainable from other perspectives, given all of the things that have gone into it since the 1960s to create these kinds of yields. And we're dealing with the downsides of pesticides, fertilizers, hybrid crops, and machinery. So we're very cognizant. Good intentions can have bad outcomes. I want to give you two concrete examples from Galway's portfolio today and how we're trying to mitigate, reduce, and eliminate them wherever possible. The first one is on electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are potentially a huge solution when it comes to climate change and sustainable mobility. Electric vehicles can be powered by renewable energy, like those being built by Inovateus. We can plug them in instead of using gasoline. It can eliminate carbon emissions. It can also eliminate local air pollution that's very problematic for human health, and in fact contributes to a lot of respiratory illness and even premature death. That's all great. What's the downside? The downside is an electric vehicle needs batteries, and those batteries require a whole bunch of minerals and metals and specialized chemicals called rare earths, and those things have to be mined out of the earth. So mining itself, obviously, a little bit detrimental to the planet in where it's occurring. They also happen to sit in the world mostly in developing countries where the labor protections for the mining community are very weak, and so you have a lot of, as you see from the photo, social and direct health risks to people doing the mining. There's another downside potentially from electric vehicles. Next. And that is that they're costly upfront. Over the life of an electric vehicle, you actually save money because you don't have to put gas in it, but you do need the upfront investment because it is more expensive than an internal combustion engine. You also need to charge it. It's very easy to charge an electric vehicle if you happen to own your own home and have a private garage and can plug it in at night when you park the car in your garage. If you live in an apartment in a city and you need to rely on shared or communal infrastructure, it may be more difficult to charge that vehicle. The double result of these two things is that almost all electric vehicles in America today are owned by wealthy white people who own their homes and live in suburbs. So we're not solving some of the health and other problems that actually directly hit lower income folks in cities from pollution. And so what Galway has done next is we have invested in a company called Hive. Hive is in the electric vehicle space, but what they are doing is they are actually leasing electric vehicles specifically to gig economy drivers like Uber and DoorDash drivers, and they're providing charging services along with the lease. The lease is very low cost subscription model, allows people to be able to get behind the wheel of an electric vehicle very easily, allows people to make money at jobs like driving, and allows these electric vehicles to be put in neighborhoods and communities that otherwise are not getting access to them today. So that's a phenomenal story. Hive is also addressing the battery and rare earth issue a bit by making their first set of investments in used vehicles. So we're extending the life of those vehicles minimizing their waste. And they are keeping an eye on the possibility to partner with battery recyclers, new technological trends that might have electric vehicles with low or no rare earths in them. So this is one investment that's trying to prevent that squeeze the balloon problem we talked about earlier. Next. Another place that we need to be cognizant of the potential squeeze the balloon phenomenon is in smart solutions. Information technology is the way of our 21st century economy. The 19th and 20th century were really focused on natural resource extraction. And if you're as old as I am, you might recall this famous magazine ad from the 80s in which Bill Gates sat on these piles of paper and he held a CD in his hand and he said, all this information from all this paper could sit on this CD. What was his message? His message is, we're going to save trees by adopting a digital solution. And that sounds fantastic. However, today, next, our digital solutions are not on CDs. They are living on the internet, in wireless technology, and in the infamous cloud. And despite its very cute and innocuous name, the cloud is not a puff of air in the sky in which all your information is living. The cloud is a bunch of buildings with computer processors and servers that are buzzing 24/7 using tons of energy and getting hot in buildings that have to be kept cool and have to be powered round the clock. And that data usage is projected to explode to be 21% of our total energy demand in the near future. So this is a place where we don't see that impact because it's all invisible to us, unlike the CD and the paper, but it's real and not sustainable. Next. So one of the things Galway did was invest in a data center company that is developing and manufacturing in a factory modular data center units. They are small, they are efficient, they are intended to address a number of problems related to large sprawling buildings and campuses and the energy use that they require. And we are committed to powering those centers with solar energy so that we can reduce the carbon footprint from the data that, that we're managing. Next. Before I turn it back to Tyler, I just wanted to say one more thing that sets Galway apart, and I think it's an example of why we're here on this call today. I talked about our ecosystem approach. We take a very holistic view at sustainability. We don't invest in a single sector or a single benefit area. And we also understand that these sectors have interconnections, that they are related to one another. We work to network our portfolio businesses with one another. They don't live in silos, all in their own lanes where they don't talk to one another. Solar energy in particular is a potentially crucial linchpin of all of the other investments in all of the other sectors. And I illustrated a few of the ways that those connections are made here on this slide. But we have already been connecting Inovateus to a number of our other portfolio businesses, like in the data center example I just gave you, where we'd like to power them with solar energy. We also have a business that's working on sustainable fishing, and they have a fish processing plant that they may be able to power with solar energy. So there's lots of ways in which we can do even more good by bringing our companies together. And with that, I'd like to bring it back to Tyler.
Thanks, Sarene. It's been great getting to partner with the Galway in the past year. Inovateus Solar is definitely in a great spot to continue to grow more sustainably in the solar industry. And I just want to let everyone know, if they do start to have questions or ideas pop up, you can use the Q&A box. The chat's closed off, but you can use the Q&A if you have any questions or thoughts, or even want to say, if you want to say hi to somebody that you see that's on here. So yeah, I'll talk for about 10 minutes and then we'll do a Q&A. So appreciate everybody logging in today, and it will be recorded. So we'll be sending it out afterwards. So Inovateus Solar has been around since 2008. We're based in South Bend, Indiana, focused on Midwest solar development in EPC. And our mission is building a brilliant tomorrow, and our core values are peace. So it brings me to the point that sustainability has been our bedrock really since we started. And in about 2019, we started a green team, our first official green team, where we got people from different parts of the company together to brainstorm how to improve our stewardship and sustainability. And essentially what we came up with, and I'm on the green team and I lead the green team, is minimizing waste in our operations, which is tied to environment, planet. Yeah, on the right in parentheses, I say, what they're related to. Basically, it's kind of the triple bottom line approach. It's a common thing thrown around in the world of sustainability, which is people, planet, profit, or environment, economic, or equality. So we tried to embrace that whole holistic approach. And also number 2 is maximize our environmental contribution. And then 3, promoting sustainability in the communities that we're doing solar. And the vision that we came up with as a green team, which also was coordinated with really our entire company, our board and leadership team, was to hit some critical goals by 2025. And those are to hit a gigawatt of solar, which were about 515 megawatts. And we have some big projects in the queue that are about to start. Being carbon neutral by 2025, and which includes carbon neutral solar sites. So we've been doing research to see how we can do offsets for our customers if they want to have a carbon neutral solar site. And then thought leadership for the industry in sustainable solar development, because as Sarene mentioned before, there are things you can do. You're trying to fix one problem and then create other issues. So we've been trying to tune into that to figure out best practices. And we essentially came up with 6 best practices for what we think is sustainable solar development. The first one is related to designing and engineering a site and striving for optimal system design and performance. So essentially, we're trying to get more power per square foot, leading to more efficiency, but also picking suitable land and using less land. So if we're using more efficient or more powerful equipment that's made sustainably or bought local, we can have less of an impact. And procurement, we're trying to buy local when possible. A lot of the equipment is globally made, so we're very aware of that sometimes we're having to ship across the globe. So we're looking into smart logistics and processes around procurement, and being as responsible as we can. And then construction on-site practices, safety and quality is a huge thing, but also we've really been pushing a zero waste initiative, which is essentially to send very little waste to the landfills when we're building a solar site. And we're trying to recycle all the shipping and packaging materials, a lot of wood, cardboard, plastics, various materials that a lot of times are being thrown away across the country. A lot of projects are on tight timelines. So we're aware that the solar industry is growing really fast and does create a lot of shipping and packaging waste when you're building. So we're trying to help educate that you can recycle a lot of the material in most regions of the country. 4 is vegetation management. So we're a lot of times planting pollinator friendly wildlife habitat underneath the solar arrays now. Some arrays are even, or some system owners are looking at agrovoltaics, which is even doing some crop or fruits and vegetables under the panels of a certain height. So that's pretty cool. And we try to practice removing very little trees. If a tree does have to be removed on a site, we try to plant, 1 to 2 additional trees. So we're always keeping track of anything that does have to be removed. And a shout out to Pine Gate Renewables. They gave us some inspiration. They sent a blog or a post out a while back about for every tree that's removed, they plant a new tree. And we thought that was a great idea and almost a no-brainer. So the pollinator habitat is a growing thing, and actually reduces pesticides, chemicals, reduces your needs of mowing, and it promotes wildlife habitat for bees and butterflies and all of that, and environmental positivity. Maintenance is a big thing here. So number 5 is related to O&M and end of life planning, and trying to help solar close the loop, really. So basically, for old or damaged equipment, or equipment that just most solar panels last 25 years, so we're not quite there yet. But when we do get there, where equipment is old, we want to have solutions in place for ourselves or for our customers to recycle that equipment. So there's great companies out there that are recycling solar panels, like Cascade Eco Minerals, that we're working with. And a lot of the equipment is recyclable, but also we want to maintain the equipment that is installed and make sure we're installing the best equipment possible, and we have the best monitoring capabilities. So we're really maximizing that power and using this equipment for as long as we can, until we do have to figure out, okay, what's the end of life plan. And then the last practice is a project vitality. So wherever we work, we want to engage and network with the communities and share them, the pros and cons of solar. I'm biased, it's mostly pros. So obviously we're trying to share with them all of the great benefits around solar, renewable energy, and the pollinator habitat that's now being planted with solar arrays. So really cool things are happening, and we want to make those positive environmental benefits aware to the communities that we're building in. And we've had many development projects where we've even hosted town halls or got together with farmers to talk about the pros and cons of solar development. So what became really important in all of our work in stewardship and sustainability is to come up with metrics that we're going to track for the entire company to report out. And so these were reported in our sustainability report that just came out a few weeks ago. You might have seen it. And a lot of the stuff I'm speaking about was in our sustainability report. So it was our 3rd annual sustainability report. So these were the 4 key metrics that were reported on. And the first one is construction waste. So as you see, we're keeping track of what's being recycled versus being landfilled. We're about 54% of recycling rate, and that number is improving. And we've had many sites that actually were over 90% to 95% recycled. So it's kind of an incremental thing. We're getting there. We're learning how to do things better. We're building a network of recycling companies that we can work with. So this number is getting better. So that's exciting to see. Total megawatts of renewable energy built. Our goal is to hit a gigawatt by 2025. Right now, we're about 515 megawatts, and we have calculators in place to figure out how many tons of CO2 that's offsetting. That would be compared to a fossil fuel based plant. So we're about 660,000 tons of CO2 that is not emitted because of a renewable energy source. 3 is pollinator habitat acres planted or under development. So we have 90 acres were developed in just 21 alone, and that was our best year yet, and we have 270 acres of pollinator habitat planted or under development. We do have some really big projects underway, so this number could change drastically. So we're pretty excited about that. So more news to come on that. And then resources delivered to the industry. So things like blogs, articles, webinars, white papers, podcasts, we count each one of those as like a resource delivered. So this is something that's related to our thought leadership goal is really helping promote sustainability in the solar industry. So we figured, hey, we got to have a metric for that if that's one of our major goals. So we kind of, over 61 resources. So we're going to keep doing things like webinars and hope to get out more white papers and case studies around some of the great things like pollinator habitat or recycling end-of-life equipment and things like that, or like really big development projects that are happening in farmland. There's a little bit of press around the pros and cons of that. So we plan to continue tracking these metrics and improving our sustainable practices to continue to get better, evolve, because as we know, we're learning new things every day in the world of sustainability. So that's it for me. Thanks everybody, and we can go ahead and go into a Q&A. It's 2:36, we could go for 20 minutes roughly, or see how many questions we get. So feel free to type in the Q&A box. It can be you can direct it to either of us or to one of us. Looks like we got one question so far.
I'm happy to answer it, Tyler. I can answer this one live. So the question was, does Galway have any investment interest in the realm of PV recycling facilities? And I would say we have generic interest in the realm of any waste reduction facilities that seem to make sense from an economic perspective and environmental perspective. This is obviously one where a fair amount of very valuable and hard to obtain materials are included in solar panels, including some of those rare earths I talked about earlier from EVs. And so anything we can do to extend the life of those minerals once we've taken them out of the earth, anything we can do to reduce the impact of the waste that might be created if they weren't recycled is phenomenal. At the end of the day, we're an investment company, and so it will come down to financial questions about the economics of the business. But generically, that would definitely fall into our goods and services category. As I mentioned earlier, we have a sort of a I wouldn't call it exactly a catch-all, but we have a wide sector that we've identified as goods and services that include any of the industrial processes that may be involved in waste reduction, waste to product, repurposing of materials. And I didn't give any of those examples today of investments we have, but we do have a few already in the spaces of industrial recycling and reuse and repurposing.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a good question.
And I would say, I know that this is a place where, one of the things that's really great about our alignment with Inovateus on this front, and why we choose portfolio companies that are very aligned, is that, as Tyler said, we know solar energy is a phenomenally, doing good industry, right? We know we need it to solve our climate problem. We know that is going to create lots of benefits for us in terms of the planet, in terms of people, et cetera. We also know there can be downsides. We could have waste from the solar industry. We should try to mitigate, reduce, eliminate that wherever possible. And Inovateus is really innovating on a few ways to do that. And same with the land use implications and other things that may be involved in solar.
Awesome. We got a question about driving more commercial and industrial solar development on rooftops. So I'd be happy to chime in on that one. So there are huge buildings all across the country, and I certainly travel a decent amount, and I'll see open rooftops all the time. And we always joke about it internally, like we're like, oh yeah, that's a great building, especially if some of us solar folks are traveling together. We're always nerding out about the open buildings that are, ready for solar. So I think that's a great example of a dual use site or way to do solar. It's like a building is already there, and if it's a big flat roof with a few obstructions, it definitely makes sense to do solar in terms of environmental footprint, because you're using a building that's already there. You don't have to take up land or potentially knock down any vegetation to install solar. So it tends to be a little bit more pricey because of the logistics and the labor to get up on a roof, get all the equipment up onto a roof. And then sometimes if a roof is older, the building owner has to upgrade the roof to do the solar. So there's definitely some hurdles there, but in many parts of the country, it makes sense. So you just have to look at it, see, how much land you're working with, who are the stakeholders, how much land is available, and it might make sense to do solar on a building is actually the most feasible. The technologies for rooftop solar has gotten better, so that's exciting. Solar panel wattages are going up, so you're able to get more efficient on roofs. It can even help the heat of a building. It can help protect a roof. So if you're re-roofing and then install solar, it actually helps protect the membrane or the roofing material up there. So there are benefits. If you compare it, 1-to-1 versus installing it on land, you might save a few cents a kilowatt, but it's definitely something that still gets me excited when I see open rooftops out there.
Tyler, there's a few other questions in here that are kind of on this same thread, and so maybe I could jump in and say a few words, and if you want to follow up on, there's sort of related questions about, including how can we promote building structures that actually will support the weight of a solar install on the roof with ballast, as opposed to, other installation techniques. What I was going to see about both of these questions is that public policy is sometimes one of the biggest impediments that we face to facilitating investments that make sense. There may be codes or laws or restrictions. There could be HOA restrictions. There could be all kinds of reasons why, things are allowed or not allowed, or how they're allowed, what kinds of permits need to be achieved, et cetera. It also desperately affects the economics. And so, one of the things we can do to drive more of this C&I development, more of this commercial and industrial rooftop or residential rooftop development, is address the public policy side, the incentives and and also the financial structures. We have utilities, ratepayers going into utilities, the voice that folks have in terms of accessing the public policy process and influencing lawmakers to make it easier and cheaper to do this work, is one of the key things that we can do to facilitate it. Because if it's not being done in certain states and certain markets, it's probably because the public policy environment is not making it easy to do. So that's one of the key impediments at this point. And then also I'd say public awareness is another big place, right? I mean, I think the more that people can tell stories, individuals, businesses can tell stories about the fact that they installed solar and these were the benefits to them. It was easy, it was cheap, it saved them money, they reduced their energy bill, et cetera. Whatever because it's a new technology, and new technology always there's an adoption curve. People are not aware of it. They might think it's complicated. They might think their roof is going to get damaged. Whatever it is, they have perceptions, they're not aware. The more they can hear from others that it works, that it is helpful, the better. One last thing I was going to say on the C&I side is that in addition to the land use issues, because these are roofs we already have, this is not new land that has to be converted into a solar development. It also addresses the resilience side a bit with regard to putting power where it's used. And especially if you're dealing with, grid instability, outages, that sort of thing, having your own source of power on your roof is actually a really important thing to address any outages, and especially things that might come with climate impacts, et cetera.
Yeah, those are great points. Yeah, thanks for elaborating more on that. And the question about elaborating on what we can do to reduce land impact is another very good question. One big thing that's pretty glaring to me is like using brownfields or Superfund sites or distressed land that really doesn't have much use. It's a brownfield, so you can do solar on most brownfields and Superfund sites, and at Inovateus we've been specializing in that and getting better at that. So that's been an exciting advancement, to use land that really can't be used for much else and doesn't promote much environmental habitat. As far as like some of the really big projects in the Midwest, there's a lot of talk around using farmland for solar and how to do that with minimal impact. So we're looking at land that the soil isn't necessarily prime soil. So we're looking at more degraded areas where we can actually install solar panels, do pollinator habitat, and actually increase the soil health there. So if they did want to remove the solar system down the road, they'd potentially have better soil that was there before, and then they could return it back to farmland. So that's one example. Definitely not removing trees or removing vegetation that is native to an area. Like that's definitely a big no-no for Inovateus. At times you might have to do like a little bit, here and there, in order to tie into the grid. But like I said earlier, we keep track of that. So we're offsetting that, or planting new trees. We're not just coming in, cutting and slashing and putting the solar and then calling it good. We're aware of any potential like negative environmental impacts. But definitely land that's close to interconnection, so you don't have to run power lines too far to hook up to the solar, is definitely optimal for cost on the project, and usually less environmental impact too. So I know there's other things. We're actually just about to put a blog out. We're calling it Green Zones. So it's essentially what we're talking about right now is finding those right sites that work well with solar, where you don't have much of an environmental impact, and if anything, you have more of a positive environmental impact when you're able to plant vegetation like pollinator habitat, or do vegetation buffers and plant trees and bushes or arborvitae, things like that. So be on the lookout for that blog that we're going to be putting out soon. So excited to talk about green zones.
Yeah. And I would say on that front, I mean, it comes down to me. I'm somebody who spent a lot of my career worried about land use change and, ecosystem impacts of a variety of human activities, from farming to residential development. And there are, the basic hierarchy of sort of avoid the most sensitive areas, reduce the impact on the areas you do impact, mitigate where possible or necessary. And Inovateus is doing so many of those things already. There's some great resources also out there. A small plug for a former employer of mine, the Nature Conservancy, did a great tool. It's called Citing Renewables Right, and it does take ecosystem science into account about where there are good places to put renewables and where places maybe should be avoided because the habitat or other values of that land are so critical for other purposes. But again, rooftops and other land we already have are great examples. We have two related questions, Tyler, on supply chain.
Yeah.
How do we, I mean, the reality is that so many of the inputs do come from the Far East, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, China, et cetera. And also that the energy use in those places often is coal-fired, and therefore, these materials are being produced with fossil energy. What can we do about that?
Yeah. I mean, one big one that comes to mind for me is there's more manufacturing going on in the United States, and there's organizations like First Solar that are based in Ohio that are growing their production. We're looking at a really big project here in Indiana that's going to use First Solar panels, and hopefully a lot of the racking equipment will come from the United States as well. So a lot of the metal, and I'm not sure about the inverters on that one, but yeah, it's definitely a hurdle, when you're having to buy internationally, and if you can't control the power that they're using in order to run the factories, and you're shipping, you're moving product across the globe, as we know, isn't always sustainable and has those emissions. So I think using more locally sourced, locally made, locally produced material is something we always have on our minds. And then, if we are buying internationally, what are their processes? Are they sustainability sourcing, or is it more eco-friendly material? Or, is it a solar? Are we getting solar equipment from a solar powered facility? But, looking at things like that. So it's almost like you create your own scorecard of what you consider to be the more optimal and sustainable, and you try to make the best decisions for your organization, and for the environment. And hopefully those are really aligned and in parallel. So I think,
yeah, I was going to just chime in here on the fact that I think that it is true, correct, that the infrastructure bill passed last year had funding for US. I know it had funding for US EV battery manufacturing. I'm not sure about solar manufacturing, but obviously this is a place where, some help kind of seeding the investments and the facilities in the US is important. The only other thing I wanted to add on this is that in addition to the potential environmental downsides of the impact of overseas manufacturing in certain locations, there's also the potential social downsides. I mentioned, rare earth mining in places where there are very few labor protections. The same concerns exist in, solar panel factories that might be operating in places where they have few labor protections. And so I know that one thing Inovateus has done is join with an industry coalition in terms of, sustainable supply chain, and focused on the social issues as well.
Yep.
It looks like there's one more question about agrovoltaics. I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah, thanks, Krista, for the question. Krista was running sustainability at IUSB and is now helping run sustainability at Penn State. So thanks for jumping on. Agrovoltaics is super new. It's definitely heavily talked about now in the solar industry, because you do have to typically get the panels higher off the ground for agrovoltaics, for crop, unless it's a low growth crop. So we do have a site here in Auburn, Indiana, that's it's around 15 to 17 megawatts. They're looking at a section of of the solar farm to do like strawberries and some fruits, I believe. So it's not a very large section. And then the rest of the array is going to be pollinator habitat, like things like clover, and I don't know if black-eyed Susans potentially, but they're going to be bringing sheep out there at some point and to do sheep grazing. So that's another cool thing that's happening in the solar industry. And we haven't done a whole lot of it yet. Inovateus hasn't, but we're getting into it and starting to promote it a little bit more. There's a group called the American Sheep Grazing Association that has a lot of great resources, contacts, and information. So we're learning more about the sheep grazing benefits with solar arrays. And then is Galway investing in any agrivoltaic projects? I don't think we have any quite yet, right?
Well, no, and I mean, to the extent that Inovateus develops projects like that, we'd be supporting Inovateus's work, but nothing direct at this point. But we have looked at a few things that folks have proposed or been innovating on, and I think like the answer I gave before, I mean, it's something we would be interested in, presuming, financially and otherwise it works out to be a good fit for us as an investor. I mean, we're very interested. The example Tyler just gave about clover is phenomenal, again, in terms of the multi-benefit opportunity. Clover is one of the best cover crops of restoring soil health on farmed land. And we're looking at whether, you can incentivize farmers to plant clover in between, crops of corn and other things to restore soil health. It's tricky because nobody pays you to grow clover. But if we can do that on land where solar panels are, we get a double benefit of improving the soil health as well as generating the solar energy. So all for the innovation on that side.
Yeah. And I think there'll be more of it coming. So Crystal will definitely be able to share more information as we move forward. And oh yeah, you just shared a link for looks like India's got some good studies. Definitely have to check that out. I know that there's been some cool arrays out in the West. I think Colorado, they did like 100 kilowatt array, which isn't a huge array. That would be like 100 kilowatts is enough to power like a small business or medium, maybe even a medium-sized business. But they did some agrivoltaics, and NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, has some great studies out about agrivoltaics now too, and also pollinator habitat, things like sheep grazing and stuff. So there's some really, really good information coming out that definitely is helping solar be more sustainable. So it's been exciting to embrace that all and promote the education around it. And then we had someone say the report of our sustainability report saying solar panel pays itself back in less than a year. I think it's 2 to 3 years on average that when a solar panel is installed in the environments that, obviously depending on exact sun irradiance, but that offsets all the emissions that it took to make the panel. And then you're going to go for 25 plus years of power production of paying that off and then adding benefits to the electrical grid. So yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. And I think we answered all of them. We got through, and we're coming up on 3 o'clock. So I think we covered a lot of great topics. Thanks everybody for the great questions. And Sarene, I don't know if you had anything else come to mind.
No, I mean, I think there was some interest in, maybe you want to say a word about the recording and what comes next. I did put a link also to your sustainability report if folks want to download it and read more about Inovateus. You're certainly welcome to go to the Galway website, learn a little bit more about us. And no, it's a pleasure being here, and it's a pleasure working with you and Inovateus and seeing all the ways in which you're helping to advance both solar development and mitigate any of the downsides that might come from those activities.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to do this with us today. And we'll likely do a Q3 and a Q4 webinar. So we'll send out information when it comes time for those. And as Sarene mentioned, we will get a recording out. And someone asked about the slides. So we should be able to share all the slides too with the recording. So you should see an email come out for that. So thanks everyone so much for spending an hour of your time with us. Hopefully you got some good information to take back to your teams and incorporate into your organization or even with your family. So we'll keep learning and keep trying to do better and better each day. And if you have any questions to us directly, here are our emails. So happy to touch base with you.
Thanks, Tyler. And thanks everybody
Sarene.
for joining. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Take
Talk
care.
soon.